Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second day of BYLC Youth South Asia Youth Resilience Summit. We are delighted to have you with us. Yesterday, we had a conversation about leadership. Today, we will be talking about business and economy, and we are delighted that so many of you are joining in. We'll just give it a couple more minutes. In the meanwhile, I would request you to write in the comment section where you're from. And we have a distinguished speaker with us today from Harvard Business School, Professor Tarun Khanna, who is also the director of the Lakshmi Mittal Family South Asia Institute at Harvard University. Tarun, welcome to the South Asia Youth Resilience Summit. We are delighted to have you with us. I will give a bit of context about why we are doing the summit. South Asia will be one of the worst hit regions because of the current pandemic that we are facing. And young people will have to be resilient. There will be a lot of pain, a lot of challenges, a lot of frustration. And we wanted to drive a conversation about what is the way forward for young people, how to think about the future, how to navigate this crisis. And therefore, we're engaging with experts, learning from them, and creating opportunities for young people in South Asia to have a conversation with our experts. And our today's expert will be talking about how he looks at the challenges that South Asia is going to face, particularly how young people can navigate this crisis. Tarun Khanna was born and raised in India. He went to the US for college. He did his bachelor's at Princeton University, and then he did his PhD from Harvard Business School. He has been teaching at HBS for the past 25 years. And what is great about him, which will add a lot of value to the conversation today, is not only is he an academic, he's also a practitioner, he is an entrepreneur, he's an investor. So he will be able to talk about how he is looking at the business sector, the business environment being shaped by the current pandemic. So Professor Khanna, I would like to invite you maybe to tell us a bit about yourself. How is staying at home affecting your work? Are you teaching classes?
Ejaz, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's very kind of you, and it's an impressive group you've pulled together. And good evening to everybody who is on this interaction. I'm looking forward to it and to getting your comments and questions. Like everybody else, we are pretty much in lockdown in Boston, in the suburbs of Boston. I have two teenagers back home with me. Well, one 18-year-old and one just turned 20, so just out of her teens. Not entirely happy to be locked down because one of them was pulled out of college and brought back. And we're adapting, but we've established a routine, and life is extremely busy actually, from a series of Zoom calls. And yes, I'm teaching a full load. So I'm teaching PhD seminars and running executive education classes with CEOs around the world. It seems that life has not skipped a beat professionally. And that itself is a sobering thought, right? Because it means that my impulse to jump on a plane and fly away for the next board meeting was unnecessary.
So you're doing all board meetings online?
Everything, 100% online. So including very high level meetings with heads of state and Fortune 100 boards and everything like that. Everything is from this spot right here in my living room.
Fantastic. No, great. Tarun, I know that you do a lot of work with entrepreneurs in Brazil, in China, but and in the US, of course. But for today's conversation, we would like you to focus your comments on South Asia. You grew up in South Asia, and many young people in South Asia are watching this show. if you could, focus on South Asia. And let me begin the conversation with a recent report that I'm sure, as you have seen, the World Bank has painted a very gloomy picture for South Asia. And they have stated that, this year may be the worst performance in 40 years for the 8 countries in South Asia. So how are you looking at the impact of coronavirus in South Asia, both from a health and from an economic perspective?
So, Ejaz, there's no doubt that this is a very, very significant public health event, catastrophe, and a very significant economic contraction. The reason, when you ask me what should we title our this interaction, I chose the title "Resilience with Eyes Wide Open," right? And the eyes wide open part just means that, look, the way to respond constructively to a crisis is, first of all, to recognize its contours. So I don't think we should shy away from the fact that what the World Bank is saying is likely correct, that this is the most significant contraction in my professional memory, and for that matter, maybe even in my parents. I'm trying to think of maybe the partition of British India or something like that, which might have been as significant, and before that, the Great Depression. But this really is up there in the most significant events. So we should not shy away from that. But on the other hand, I would say that already industries are being upended. New opportunities are emerging. Some industries are surging. The contours of what is likely to survive and what is likely to be compromised are becoming clearer. And I think part of what we should be doing is using the time that we have been, in a sense, gifted when we are forced to be indoors in proximity with people, with all the benefits of this kind of online engagement, is to invest the time into scout out new opportunities. I'm happy to talk about that some more also as we go along. On the health side, it is a disaster. And look, in countries like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, all the other countries of South Asia, we have severely stressed, we talk about surge capacity in hospitals in Boston. Every day is a surge day in Dhaka, right? Every day is a surge day in Delhi. There's no day when the hospital is not full. So in a sense, our public health systems are so overstressed that we are bound to suffer from it. On the plus side, we have a younger population. There's an argument that there might be some pre-existing immunity from a variety of contextual circumstances. We should hope for the best and prepare for the worst in some sense. So that's what I would say. But again, on the plus side, what you're seeing is that the health systems are adapting. The industrial sectors are adapting. Indigenous manufacturing is starting to kick in some ways. Now that the deer in the headlights syndrome has passed, right? Which is everybody's frozen and paralyzed. Now people are trying to say, okay, maybe this is bad, but maybe there is something that we can do.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Great. Tarun, we already have 500 plus people watching this live. More people are coming in. So that's wonderful. I have a lot of questions for you, but today I also want to give an opportunity to our participants to ask you questions. Already we have Nazar Mulia from Ukraine. His question is, Professor, how do you think COVID-19 will affect the income distribution of countries? So will rich country become richer, poor country become poorer? What will be the impact in your assessment?
Thank you, Nazar. It's a very good question. My immediate intuition is to say that I think income disparities have a likelihood of worsening. And there are two reasons for this, or multiple reasons for this. One is that your ability to capitalize on new opportunities as they become available, and I'm not minimizing the downsides of this for 1 second, but I want to try to be optimistic where I can in what is otherwise a sea of gloom. The opportunity to capitalize depends on your being digitally savvy and having access to pre-existing technology platforms, which of course is already unequal. So there's a sense in which there is a built-in ratchet mechanism which will exacerbate, make worse than the existing inequalities. So I'm really worried about that. The second thing is, you would have noticed that every government in the world has embarked on a massive stimulus program, right? Monetary stimulus, fiscal stimulus. They're pumps are open, wherever the fiscal and monetary pumps are open as wide as they
Yeah.
can. And that's appropriate in the short run,
Yeah.
very appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the downside of this is also easy to see. What you'll see
Yeah.
is a massive debt crisis, particularly in the
Yeah.
developing countries, certainly in
Yeah.
South Asia, certainly in Eastern Europe, where you're calling from.
Yeah.
And then we will have this familiar dance about debt forgiveness and
Yeah.
odious debt and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So already there are calls from some of my colleagues at the Kennedy School
Yeah.
saying that we should be proactive in thinking about the renegotiation of debt so that that doesn't become a crushing burden that
Yeah.
worsens the inequalities. So,
Yeah.
but I do think that we should recognize that is a serious prospect.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think that's a great insight. So you spoke about the stimulus, the debt problem. Now, one follow-up question to that is, right now, South Asia, as you saw, Prime Minister Modi has extended the lockdown. In
Yes.
Bangladesh, Prime Minister Hasina has extended the lockdown. Now, a country like America with a $2-3 trillion stimulus package, America can afford to give one, 2, or 3 stimulus packages, but countries in South Asia cannot afford multiple stimulus packages. They cannot afford prolonged periods of lockdown. These countries have large informal sector workers. So how should these countries navigate this? Because the theories that apply to the West may not apply to South Asia. So what's your take on that?
No, it's a exactly correct observation, Ijaz. Look, the principles of the epidemics, the pandemics are the same everywhere. The science is the same, the virus is the same. Maybe human beings' susceptibility to the virus differs depending on their genetic makeup and their historical exposure to disease and so on. But the principles by which the virus spreads are identical. The strategies that are available, whether it's a combination of testing, vaccination, and cures on the one hand, and I want to come back to that whenever we have a chance to judge on the science, because I think there's a lot of optimism on the science. So let's come back to that. But whether you think about testing, vaccination, cures as one bucket, and then you think about this so-called social distancing to quote unquote flatten the curve on the other, those instruments are the same to everybody. The question is, how do you calibrate the use of the instruments in response to the initial conditions? And as your comment rightly observed, that calibration has to be sensitive to the context. And what we will find in every developing country, including the countries in South Asia and many others that are probably represented here, we will find that on the margin, we will have to privilege livelihood more than we more than we are able to avoid privileging in the US because of our relative wealth. So we'll have to open up and experiment with opening up simply because we don't have the cushions and the social security nets to and the luxury to just be locked down. But by the way, on the flip side, opening up is going to accelerate herd immunity, right? Which itself has a built-in protective mechanism.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great insight. I think we touched upon briefly on sort of the policy implications and the hard choices that governments in South Asia will have to make. But today, because we have a lot of young people, I want to sort of focus on youth issues. But before I move to youth issues, there is one question which I think is relevant. It came from Mohammad Abdul Halim from Pabna, Bangladesh. Hi, Professor. Which industries in South Asia will face a downfall and which ones will boom during and after this pandemic? I think this also covers the business sector, because I think a lot of the large entrepreneurs, and you're a study of business, right? So what's your take? What's your research showing?
Oh, I mean, I think, the broad patterns are already quite visible, right? You can see this, for instance, in the decline in stock market value of, by industry in country after country. So, places like restaurants, travel, airlines, these kinds of things are suffering. Anywhere where you need congregation of people, right? Theme parks, entertainment, movie theaters, those are the hardest hit. On the other hand, in our own portfolio of investments, for instance, at Axelor, which is a incubator I set up in Bangalore, what we're also
Yeah.
seeing is that there are a bunch of people who are doing much better than others. For instance,
Yeah.
telemedicine is all the rage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Delivery businesses are all the rage, even though, by the way, that does expose the delivery people, the gig economy people, to more
Yeah. Yeah.
more threats to some extent.
Yeah.
So there you can clearly see, and those patterns, you can almost just go on the web and
Yeah.
Google which industry goes down, and McKinsey reports or some consulting
Yeah.
firm report will pop up, and there are
Yeah.
plenty of these all over.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
the main point is that there will be a reallocation towards newer sectors.
Newer sectors. Yeah. There is one question from Dinesh Saptoka. Uh, it's a great fortune to be here. Respected Professor Tarun Khanna, what type of entrepreneurship in the agriculture sector will prosper in South Asia? So, what's your analysis of agriculture? Because many countries in South Asia are food sufficient. We have enough food. Food has not been. We have achieved food security in South Asia. But post this pandemic, any sort of insight or prediction about agricultural sector or businesses, entrepreneurs in this space?
I don't have deep competence in the agriculture sector, but I can hazard an educated guess. In the longer run, you will see an adjustment of diets. Let me give you an example. That's a little bit distant from the response. Will appear to be a little bit distant from what you asked, but it's not. So bear with me for a second.
Okay.
One of the reasons you're getting pandemics now is that viruses that are normally native to animal species are jumping the animal-human barrier, right? And then humans are not used to it, so we die from it. To keep it very simple and brutal. But the reason that's happening is that we're destroying the habitat. And the reason we're destroying the habitat is that we are cultivating irresponsibly as a world society. I'm not talking about South Asian figures, world society. And so we are coming more and more in proximity with animals that we're not really meant to be that proximate to. So part of what's going to happen is, I think in 10, 15, 20 years, you will you will see a rethinking of the science of eating and nutrition, which of course is what drives agriculture ultimately. But that is still 10, 15 years away before you see impacts of that. You're already seeing it in California and Boston, but by the time we see it in Dhaka and Mumbai, it's going to be a while. That's one change. The second thing I think that will change is the entire agricultural supply chain will have to be revisited. How do the farmers accumulate the produce? How is the produce bought? Where is it warehoused? Because you're already finding that in situations like this, the agricultural supply chain has been so severely disrupted that outside of the major cities, agricultural produce all over Africa, all over South Asia is rotting already, right? So how do we think about all the standard problems that anybody in the business world who deals with supply chain issues will have to think through?
We'll have to think through.
Lastly, I think that consumer buying patterns will change, right? Of food and like everything else. Already you're seeing, the shift towards immediate delivery is accelerating. And you have that happening in Bangladesh also. But certainly all over India and Pakistan and other places, we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing it in Boston also. So I think the way to think about this is, of course, some things are very difficult to change in any country, including in South Asia. Land holdings are difficult to change. Cultivation patterns, the stock of grains, the nature of fertilizers, those are slower moving changes. So the way I think to think about this is twofold. Look at the entire agricultural supply chain, break it down into bits and pieces, and ask yourself, what is the change in each? And recognize that some of the changes are immediate. Some of them are in a 1 to 3 year time period, and some of them are in a 5 to 10 year time period. And that'll give you a framework for assessing this.
For thinking about the future. I think that's fantastic. So people's eating habits will change. And we may be seeing more responsible farming, how we use fertilizers, how we are growing our crops. And so those things will become more important in people's mind in a post-pandemic environment.
That's right.
Yeah. No, great. No, thank you. Lots of questions are pouring in. So I think
you'll have to aggregate them.
I have to aggregate them. So a couple of questions around education. How will higher education be impacted because of this pandemic?
This is as somebody who is professionally in higher education, and it's the passion of my life is to do research and teach and see it translated into impact. This is both an exciting time and a scary time. Let me give you a local example from my home institution at Harvard. Normally, if we had done an online interaction, I'm making these numbers up, I don't have the facts, but it's order of magnitude correct. We may get a few thousand people signing up for a particular engagement. These days, in the same time duration, my recollection is that we get 50 times that much. 50,000 people signing up. That gives you a sense of how
the appetite
readily the appetite is there. Maybe you think of it as people were sort of sitting on the fence and saying, online is nice, but it's not as nice as in person. But now, given no other choice, they have taken the leap. They've taken the leap. And honestly, if you ask me, like my PhD seminars when I'm teaching, which is higher ed at its finest, it's a group of 5 to 10 people. There really is no difference between teaching it sitting around a table or being on a webinar. With a group of 20, 30 people with interaction, I would say, we're about 80% as effective, and maybe we'll get to 85% as effective over time, which is not a bad cost-benefit trade-off, right? In terms of doing this. So I think the model of higher education will change fundamentally. And higher education in many parts of the world is financially unsustainable as it currently exists. So we are forced into either charging very high fees, which makes it unaffordable for the masses, or we are forced to rely on a philanthropy and a donation model, which again is only feasible for a few institutions. So again, there's an opportunity, and your own Bangladeshi brethren, Sal Khan, has been a leading voice in this. So it's great. It's great. He's ahead of his time, and I hope his enterprise, magnifies
because of this. Fantastic,
absolutely.
Great. But a lot of questions in education, because many South Asians have the aspiration to go to the West when they're 18 to go for college, right?
Sure, I did that too.
You did that too. It's the same for many of us. But if South Asia struggles with containing this pandemic, and if the West opens up and we struggle and there is cycles of this pandemic in South Asia, it is not impossible to be travel restrictions in a year, in 2 years. So travel may be limited. In that case, what's your assessment of the opportunities for South Asian young people to pursue higher education, say at top universities around the world? Will an online degree carry the same weight as a physical campus degree? Because all these top universities have spent so much money on building their campuses. How do you think that will balance out?
Look, I don't know for sure, obviously, but I can, again, hazard the principles of some guesses, right? One is, for sure, the balance will shift towards online everywhere. In other words, if X percentage of academic activity was happening online, you should now see X plus something, whatever your starting circumstance might be. Second, I think there is we should all in our own countries. I should clarify that I'm extremely involved with higher education in India. In fact, I sit on something called committee set up by the Prime Minister to further higher education and to create what we hope would be 100 amazing universities in India. And I'm sure there are similar structures in initiatives and structures in all the South Asian countries. So I'm extremely involved in trying to move the policy debate forward in India, as well as in nurturing new entrepreneurial efforts at private sector universities, higher ed institutions in India that are really actually quite promising. So it's not clear to me that, how the balance shifts. I think the balance is going to have to shift both the greater propensity to embrace technology and online learning, and the fact that there is a recognition in all developing countries, particularly the South Asian countries, that homegrown institutions are an important part of the academic framework, will shift the tendency away from my generation, Ejaj, and maybe even your generation, from our generation's time, desire to go to the West, to recognizing that more of us can have our needs satisfied at home, in effect. And I think that's a very good thing, because it leads to a slightly more equitable distribution of talent than is otherwise the case.
So I think for all the young people who are, watching us online, thinking about higher education, how will I, go to the US? What will be my scholarship opportunities? I think your message is, look, our governments in South Asia are investing a lot. They care a lot about education. There will be world-class institutions coming up from our region, and it will not be necessary for everyone to travel elsewhere to get access to quality education. There will be lots more home.
Yeah, the way to think about that's correct. Now I recognize, of course, that if you're, in the 18 to 25 year bracket, these institutions are not going to emerge overnight. So let's be realistic about it, right? So the way that I would frame it positively and accurately is that you should take a slightly more holistic look at your likely career, right? And don't just think about optimizing the immediate next 3 years or 4 years. I need to go, to London or the US or something. But think about how will I accumulate a set of experiences over the next 10 years that are meaningful and interesting. And part of that may be being educated at home, being educated online to some extent, participating in a shorter course overseas to get exposure, spending a little bit of a work internship in even in the local region in Singapore, or in a different South Asian country if that proves feasible. I think all those are accumulations of experiences, and that really is the better way to think about human capital augmenting than just going and getting your ticket stamped. Think holistically.
No, that's a great advice. No, thank you. I think that's a great advice. A lot of questions around the labor force. Khaled Mahfouz Saif. Hi, Professor. Every year, many youth enter Bangladesh's labor force. In these circumstances, there's a huge possibility where the unemployment rate shall increase. What should be the strategy of the public and private sectors to arrange jobs for these newcomers after the crisis ends? Just to add to that, in a recent UNICEF report, they mentioned that 100,000 young people enter the job market every day in South Asia. That's a lot of numbers. Now we are seeing, because of coronavirus, a lot of people are losing jobs. A lot of graduates will be coming and struggling to find jobs, particularly in South Asia. So how should the question talks about what should be the strategy of the public and private sectors. Maybe you can comment a bit from the public and private sectors, and then talk a bit about strategies for young people, because they don't have the public and private sectors in their control. What they have in control is their decision. So how should young people be spending this time? How do they prepare for this uncertainty?
Thank you, Khalid, for that question. There are many questions wrapped in there, as Ejaz was trying to paraphrase. So let me try to address them at different levels, right? See, one of the things that economists are always taught is that education is a public good, right? And that's just jargon for basically saying that when you educate a child, the child benefits, but society also benefits. And most of the benefits of a particular child's education actually accrue probably to society. And so therefore, individuals will never invest adequately, and you should rely on the state to do it. Now, you and I know that the state is weak in all South Asian countries. The intent may be there, the will may be there. You have very enlightened policymakers. I hope some of them are listening. And I salute all our intelligent and hardworking policymakers. But it is a Sisyphean task. It is a very difficult task when you have 1.7, 1.8 billion people many of whom are in poverty, to create higher education for everyone. So at the end of the day, the private sector has a fundamental role to play in helping the public sector along. Because after all, who is the public sector? The public sector is simply us. We vote people into office, they hire people. It's no different. It's the same Bangladeshis and Pakistanis and Sri Lankans and Indians, right? So, so there has to be a collaborative effort. One of the things that I've been very involved with in my country of origin, India, is to work aggressively on this higher education front and to try to produce policy reports and walk the talk in my own limited way to encourage corporations to work in tandem with the universities, to create opportunities for you, to create internship programs, to create networks of hundreds and thousands of incubators across India, to create these so-called tinkering labs, which are workspaces that we create in high schools, which are often supported by the private sector, right? So think about learning science. The way I learned science in Bangalore was not particularly inspirational. You had a textbook, you listened to a lecture, and then you spat it out in the exam, right? But if you can learn science by playing with things in a little laboratory, which is not expensive these days, which the private sector can fund even in public sector schools and at universities, that's a real way forward. So we need the public and private sectors to work together. That's part of the answer. Should I answer the rest of the question, Ijaj?
Yes, the rest of the, yes, absolutely. I think you spoke about, the university industry partnership will be critical. But what happens on the demand side? Because, you can create skilled workers, people, but if the demand is not there in the economy, then how will they find jobs? So what should be...
So the demand, so we should, I think the answer to that, Ijaj, is that we have to stop thinking of demand in a vocational sense. We have to stop thinking about demand in the sense of, I have a demand for an electrician, or I have a demand for a software engineer, or I have a demand for a computational biologist. We have to think about demand for creativity, demand for risk-taking, demand for initiative-taking, demand for resilience, demand for empathy. And those are genetic skills. And what we need is the private sector to, and for that, by the way, there is unlimited demand. Right? Show me a well-intentioned, well-adjusted investor, entrepreneur, CEO who will not happily hire people who are willing to take the initiative and think through problems and take a little bit of risk. In every country, in Boston, in Bangalore, in Botswana, the demand is always there. So if we can shift the education towards, on the margin, prioritizing these attributes rather than vocational specificity, then we're off to the races. It's a tough transition, but it's doable.
Yeah, I think and now is the right time to think about it. I think what you're saying is, we need to focus on creativity, entrepreneurial ability, empathy, ethics. These are skills that all employers look for.
Are always in demand. And you let me also comment on the immediacy of this, because I recognize that for young people, I see my kids, they're young people, they are 18 and 20. And I can see that they are wondering, what does this actually mean? I personally tell them, and I tell you all also, those of you who are in the right age group, that the best thing to do is to get involved in your community right now. Of course, you are right now probably under lockdown. You can't actually physically go about, but soon that will change. And I say, get involved in the community. Find a company that's doing something interesting, a social sector enterprise is doing something. Find your local place of worship if you want. Find your local school and get involved in a project. Because the more you immerse yourself in the problems, the more you will spot opportunities to do interesting things, the more you will spot entrepreneurial possibilities that may even be for-profit enterprises down the road. But unless you dive into it head first, it's unlikely that sitting in your room, these are not the opportunities that show up on job boards. No exciting opportunity is listed on a job platform. They're all between your ears here.
No, absolutely. I think that's great advice, because if the economy is not doing well, if there are not many job opportunities, young people can volunteer, build their, volunteer skills, managerial skills, use the time. I think it goes very well with the next question. I think as a follow-up, you've already answered it if you have 1 or 2 points on this. So here's Sabit. Professor Khanna, from your experience of teaching and coaching young people at HBS, what would be your advice for the undergraduate and postgraduate students who are preparing to enter the job market?
So if you still have time in your formal education career, I would try to identify some of the sunrise industries. I don't like the word industries, because the industries of the future are not even visible today. Sunrise pockets of knowledge. How about that? Right? So let me give you an example, right? Which would again sound far-fetched to you, but trust me, it is going to change your life in the next 5 years. that the last few decades have been the decade of silicon, right?
Yeah.
Semiconductor, right?
Yeah.
You've heard about Moore's law, right? It's cascading technological developments, driven everything from the computer to the mobile phone to this and that. The next century, well, maybe not century, maybe the next several decades is going to be the decade of the genome, right?
Yeah.
And if you compare the speed with which semiconductor know-how has ratcheted up over the last 30, 40 years, genome sequencing is going to dwarf that, right?
Yeah.
In other words, the rate at which we can sequence the genomes of every living creature is accelerating at a faster and faster pace. So at this point, it used to be that it cost millions of dollars to sequence the genome of any living thing. Now it costs, there's an outfit at Oxford in England that does it for $100 with a pocket genome sequencer. So why am I saying this? Because once you understand the genetic makeup of everything around you, you can fundamentally change life. Now think of, this is probably going to generate 100 industries. Right? So what is your best bet as a young person in college? It's to at least understand what this is and to dive into it. You don't have to be a scientist, but you need to understand. Otherwise you will not recognize the opportunity, even if it slaps you in the face.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's fantastic. And I know you love to talk about science. I saw your recent presentation. So I want to give you some time to talk about the science, but I have two more questions.
Sure.
One friend from Nepal, Lachana Sakya, greetings from Nepal. There will be a large drop in job opportunities due to COVID-19. What kind of entrepreneurial opportunities can get fostered in this type of situation? So to combine this, because this is a question from a young person about entrepreneurial opportunities. I know you run an accelerator. In India, you spoke about large companies in your book Trust, and you're involved with a lot of startups. Tell us a bit about your assessment for new startups coming up. And startups are, as you know, high growth companies, but there will also be opportunities for SMEs, right? Cash positive businesses. So what are the entrepreneurial opportunities that you see for young people in South Asia moving forward?
So let's distinguish between the next 6 months and then the period after that. I think for 6 months, getting a new venture funded is going to be extremely difficult everywhere. In Boston, certainly in Dhaka, in Bangalore, in Guangzhou, in Sao Paulo, everywhere, Berlin. The economy is in lockdown, right? So nothing is moving. So it's best not to hit your head on the wall. I myself have 2-3 new ventures I'm involved with now that had term sheets issued to us, which were all back down. So this is happening to everyone. It is not unique to South Asia. So you have to recognize that. But I think the situation is going to be very different in 6, 9 months, 12 months, whatever that time period is. So the best thing to do now, if you have an idea, is to nurture it along and to think of experiences that you can use to refine the pitch and the opportunity to some extent. But the opportunity, I actually really believe, is unlimited. It really is unlimited. There are so many neat things happening. Even in the middle of this crisis, you're seeing telemedicine, medical diagnostics, device making, the usual thing that there's so much ingenuity that's triggered by desperate need. You're seeing an explosion of enterprise. I don't know about Dhaka, but I can tell you in Delhi and Mumbai and Bangalore, and in Boston and in Guangzhou, there is so much enterprise that's starting up just to cater to the needs of particular subsegments of the, if you will, the COVID supply chain. What I mean by that, from the time that somebody gets infected to isolated, to needing to go to the hospital to be treated, to be critical care, and hopefully to recovery. There are so many micro opportunities, and entrepreneurs are targeting different bits and pieces of them. So it's a question of approaching it not with paralysis and fear, but a question of approaching it with, I think the best I would say is curiosity and empathy.
And being realistic.
Those are the 2 things. And being realistic, yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there will be a lot of entrepreneurial opportunities. I think you spoke about telemedicine. In a lot of sectors, there will be opportunities. I think for young people, just to sort of summarize your recommendation, what you're saying is there will be a lot of opportunities, but getting venture funding may take a bit more time. So you have to be patient, endure that, start working on a prototype, get your product, get a minimum viable product, and then if you can show some results, traction, eventually that support will come. So not all is lost. And maybe because of the job losses, entrepreneurship may be a good sort of a way forward for many young people in South Asia, just to think about starting their own thing.
And I would just add, Ijaz, that I think I know that this is not how most young people think, but I think it's the right way to think. The way to organize your efforts is to work on something that is exciting and novel, right?
Yeah.
Now, that may result in a new venture that you create and get funded, but it may equally result in working for an interesting organization that allows you to take that idea and run with it. Your objective should be in maximizing the learning at your age, right? At the age of 20s and so on, 20s and 30s. It should just be to maximize the learning from that venture, because that has a multiplicative effect on your trajectory, not on optimizing how do I make the most money in the next 3 years.
That's a wonderful recommendation. I think, just to summarize what you have said, I think the focus for young people right now is to build their skills, get meaningful experiences, make a difference, and learn. And I fully agree with what you said. It's not the time to think about your paycheck. That time will come. If you focus on learning, that eventually you'll get dividends in multiples in the long run. You went mute, yeah. So I think that's great. A question from our chairperson, Akramuddin Chaudhary from Dhaka BYLC's chairperson. He thinks a lot about AI. So his question to you is, do you see a permanent loss of manual work to automation as a result of the pandemic?
Not as a result of the pandemic, but as a result of the increasing sophistication of machine learning and AI. Yes, I see a reduction in many forms of manual work. Look, as a student of history also, I would say that every time people have predicted a reduction in manual work, they've been proven wrong, because new types of manual work show up. So we have to have some humility with these sorts of predictions. But at least the way I would qualify my response to your chairperson is to say that existing kinds of manual work, yes, I see a reduction in those. By the way, the AI kind of revolution that is now in its third or fourth iteration, going back to the 1940s with Marvin Minsky at MIT, the advent of neural nets and so on, and now coming back in its current guise, is a fabulous thing. I mean, it has its risks and rewards and abuses, but it really is a fabulous way to ultimately just do better pattern recognition of society's organization and to improve the allocation of everything that we do. So it's something that we should really celebrate.
Okay. Related to sort of automation, another question from our friend Nabil Subat. Professor Khanna, it's a pleasure having you with us. I'm an accounting graduate. I'm just one exam away from completing my MBA and also pursuing CMA degree, which is halfway done. Should I modify my career to prepare for post-corona crisis? And what extra skills shall I need to acquire within this period? So people who are in the accounting profession, like you also have an accounting sort of, a lot of courses at HBS. And a lot of softwares can do this accounting work, right? Before you needed 5 accountants, now you have software. They do the vouchers and all the statements are out. Any sort of advice or any insight on how the field of finance accounting will evolve?
It's a good question. And look, there are a lot of white collar professions. Accounting would be one amongst them. Some kinds of legal services would be another. Radiology is another one, even though we think of radiologists as being very highly trained as they are. But these are all susceptible to pattern recognition, machine learning, AI-led interventions, and that's the truth. But in all these cases, there will always be room for a judgment, right? Even an accountant has to make judgment. You have to make judgment of how to recognize the quality of an intangible asset. Do I capitalize it? Do I expense it? What's the appropriate rule recognition to apply,
Yeah.
there's an endless list of judgment items, right? The one thing I
Yeah.
learned at HBS in my MBA class
Yeah.
about accounting, which I thought would be a dry exercise. I had a lady, Professor Mary Barth, who was really very stern looking and looked like an accountant should look, but turned out to be the most sarcastic, funny lady in the world. And what she convinced us was that accounting actually is all about judgment. It's
Yeah.
not about the exercise of rules. So in that sense, I would say, no, don't change your profession. Think
Yeah.
about places where you can marry your skill sets with the skill sets
Yeah.
of automatic accounting packages
Yeah.
and add a layer of judgment on top of it.
Yeah.
In fact, start a company that takes these
Absolutely.
packages
Yes.
and
Yeah.
say,
Yeah. And
I can
yeah,
tell you,
absolutely.
I can add judgment to this guy's recommendation and
Yeah.
use it to reach many more people. So, you should be celebrating, not being
Yeah.
worried about your profession.
No, absolutely. I think that's a great advice. Um, one question around this lockdown continuation. How long should these lockdowns continue? One question from Qazi Zawad. Professor Mushfiq Mubarak of Yale argued recently that South Asia should rethink about carrying on lockdown measures because our structural inefficiencies and lack of well-developed social safety nets can harm poor people more, which is evident in Bangladesh. I'd like to ask what Professor Khanna thinks about how long we can carry forward these lockdown measures.
Yeah, look, this is a variation of a question that came up
Yeah,
about half an hour ago, which
yeah,
is at the end of the day, the objective function for policymakers should be to minimize suffering,
yeah,
not to minimize deaths to virus. And
yeah,
to think crudely, there are two forms of suffering in the current situation. One is deaths to virus, and the other is death by misery,
economic. Yeah,
right? Economic death. Angus Deaton at Princeton
yeah,
calls them deaths of despair. Angus Deaton and his wife,
yeah,
Anne Case, both economists, they refer
yeah,
to it as deaths of despair. They have a lovely new book. Well, it's
yeah,
not lovely because it's a
yeah,
despairing topic, but deaths of
yeah,
despair. So you should optimize what is the sequence of lockdowns that minimizes total deaths, if you want.
yeah,
And Mushtaq is correct at Yale that ultimately in the poorer countries, as we were saying earlier, the
yeah,
balance has got to be towards less lockdown in general,
yeah,
because we don't have the
yeah,
luxury to
yeah,
only have complete lockdown funded
yeah,
by capital markets
yeah,
and future oriented redistributive monies, so to speak.
yeah.
Um,
So that's the balance that societies in South Asia will have to make. But if the situation is, if governments in South Asia beyond April, May, it cannot bring this under control, and then they have relaxed lockdowns, there is a possibility that 6, 7 months down the line, if things don't improve in South Asia, then other Western countries may also lock down South Asian countries,
oh, I mean, I
which
think
case industries, business will be
yeah.
affected.
See, again, there are lots of opportunities here, right?
Yeah.
If you approach
So
it that way.
the domestic supply chain businesses sort of be more dependent, less imports from China and
But
elsewhere.
more than that,
Yeah,
Vijay, more than that. So what is going to happen? I don't know the
yeah,
exact duration, sequencing, and periodicity. It's beyond my
yeah,
competence set.
yeah,
But you have epidemiologists and
yeah,
mathematicians kind of modeling this on a daily basis now. But it's pretty clear that, because this virus has what's called an R naught of 2.4. In other words, each
yeah,
person on average infects 2.4 people.
infecting.
That's a fairly contagious virus. So
Yeah,
it has gone all over the world already, right?
yeah,
It may not be detected yet, it's gone all over the world. So virus reservoirs will exist somewhere or the other. It's not possible that we
yeah,
can stamp it out. So no matter what we do in Dhaka
yeah,
or Delhi,
yeah,
this is going to pop up again, right?
yeah,
For sure. And it's going
yeah,
to pop up periodically,
mhm,
sometimes in our backyard, sometimes in a neighbor's backyard, sometimes in a distant country. So we should
yeah,
get used to a world until the vaccine arrives,
yeah,
um, or a vaccine test cure, that trio that I need to say something about, Ijaj.
mhm,
Until
yeah,
that arrives, we should expect to see every organization, whether it's higher ed, companies, governments, public
yeah,
distribution systems, being episodically interrupted. And so there's a real premium on somebody thinking through what does it mean to run an episodically interrupted model.
model.
And
Yeah,
we're all trying to figure this out in real time. It's a business
yeah,
opportunity. It's a
yeah,
policy making opportunity. There's a lot of
Yeah.
creativity here that needs to be brought to bear.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great insight, and there are a lot of opportunities. It's just a matter of looking out for what new opportunities will emerge. It will be a difficult time. What I'm hearing from you is going
Yes.
to be a difficult time, and that is the sort of, if I want to come back to your suggestion of the title of this session, resilience, eyes wide open. I think maybe you can, because I did not give you a lot of time to talk about your own ideas. We started taking questions. I think it's only fair that maybe you can talk about a question that you wish I had asked but did not, for the next five,
No, I
7 minutes.
wanted to,
And
yeah,
also
so
circle back to this idea of
yeah,
resilience, with
yes,
eyes wide open. And I'll just read the last question and you can combine it with your closing sort of remarks.
okay.
We have 10 minutes left. Usman Yusuf from an expatriate Pakistani living in UAE. Public safety is a concern in South Asia and in other developing regions. With job losses increasing and relief efforts falling short, what role do government, private sector, and citizens need to do to avoid public safety issues, such as robberies and looting, which is a difficult question
Yeah.
for you, but that's on the mind of young people. I think some of the questions that we're getting from young people is what's on their mind, what's bothering them, and
Yeah,
so that's a
look,
big
it's,
challenge.
let me speak to Osman's question in UAE. Look, it's on my mind. I have a mother-in-law lives alone in Bombay, and I have elderly parents living in Gurgaon in Delhi. Trust me, public safety is very much on my mind. I don't think that the formal public safety apparatus is going to be sufficient to get us to the level of comfort that we need to be at. Of course, the apparatuses are starting to work in these different countries. There's a lot of problems with the way lockdowns are being implemented in different places, some errors and so on. But I think ultimately the community is going to have to band together. One of the things that I've seen in my native Delhi is that localized communities have come together in many instances, regardless of what the government is saying and the state is saying. The local communities have come together and have formed self-help groups, in effect. And we've seen this throughout human history in every society. So there's no reason why we can't double down and encourage the formation of these local groups. And look, it has the long run benefit that it strengthens social bonds, and nothing is more important to the existence of a vibrant community. So that's what I would look to. I would look to the sanctity and the resilience of local bonds, irrespective of other. One of the nice things that we're seeing, I believe that we're seeing across India, is that we've had a period where there has been some pretty strident political rhetoric in the last couple of years, angry voices across different divides. And the optimist in me wants to say that we're seeing less of that now in the last 3-4 weeks, because people are understanding that this is a crisis that affects everybody, that the virus does not respect economic boundaries or racial boundaries or religious boundaries or ethnic boundaries or caste boundaries in India, are perpetual disease. And so people are coming together in a nice way. And I'm just hoping that we can capitalize on this. So that's, Osman, that's my response to you, is that we have to strengthen community norms. And a byproduct of that will be better public safety.
Yeah.
Let me turn to one positive thing that I wanted to point out for the youth, not in an instrumental sense of go out of your door the minute the lockdown ends and go do this. But I hope to give you a little bit of hope. One of the nicest things that's happened, that I've seen happen across the world, is that the world scientific community has come together beautifully, just beautifully, in so many different ways. I put a post on my LinkedIn page just yesterday because I was so happy with this. And it got an explosion of responses. And the title of the post was "Why I Choose to Be Happy." And a lot of this is optimism about my fellow scientists, fellow academics, and so on, abandoning our hyper-competitive instincts to some extent, not fully, but to some extent, and saying, let's share ideas, let's share intellectual property, and see if we can hasten the race towards repurposing an existing already approved medicine, or rethinking the engineering design of a particular test to make it cheaper, or a ventilator to make it more affordable. across the board. I'll remind you that the reason that the Chinese, the reason that the efforts on vaccines and tests have received such a good start is that the Chinese scientists were the first to publicly disclose the genome sequence of the virus immediately after it occurred. Now, in a partisan, hyper-competitive scientific world, you could imagine that they would have said, "We'll keep it to ourselves and be the first to publish in a prestigious journal." But that's not what they did. They posted it, and it took off. So I'm excited that once the panic has subsided a little bit and people are starting to get their bearings and have abandoned the deer in the headlights syndrome, that the good nature of humans is coming out. And I want to celebrate that. So go to my LinkedIn post and add your criticism of it or your support of it. But I really am happy about that.
What's your assessment of, because you're in touch with the scientific community, and what's your assessment of the duration by which this vaccine will be out in the market in South Asia? Like, first it's going to come out in the West.
Okay, so so let me comment on all three, because it's inappropriate to focus only on the vaccine, but comment on the test, vaccine, and cure, right? The cure is not going to be out for a while, but what we are going to see is repurposed medications that are partial cures, right? So antiviral medication or anti-cancer medication that's out there that scientists believe may have some mechanism of action that works for this virus, that will start to kick in. And that might just mean that out of 100 people who are infected, currently around the world, maybe 10 need hospital care, 20 become symptomatic, 10 need hospital care. Maybe that 10 goes down to 5, which would be a dramatic improvement, right? So not everybody needs to rush to the hospital. So that is going to happen in the next 6-8 months as this progresses. And that's another reason for lockdown, because you want to only have no lockdown when there is a better cure to some extent. On the tests, we have existing tests already, antibody tests and so on, but they are not scalable. They're expensive and they're unscalable. That's the problem. So people are working on antigen tests and antibody tests. I think you're going to start seeing those also in the next few months, better and better versions, more scaled up manufacturing capacities. That'll help. The vaccine, I think the earliest you'll see is 12 months. More likely 18 to 20 months, which by the way is fast for a vaccine. And the reason it's fast is that we have the genome sequence and we have some sense of what to do with coronavirus is a known family of viruses. But Ijaz, you made another comment, which is you expect to see it later in South Asia than in the developed world. So here I'm optimistic. And the reason is there's an outfit called Gavi in Geneva. What is it? I forget the acronym, something about vaccines and immunization. But it's a 20-year-old nonprofit that works together with the UN agencies and the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum and so on. And a lot of its function is to ensure equitable distribution of vaccines. And they are an important player in the current debate about how COVID vaccines will be created. And so their whole mandate is to make sure that there is no hoarding of vaccines and to arrange the financing of vaccine distribution in a way that makes it equitable. So that poorer countries don't get it too late. So I'm a little bit more optimistic about that.
No, fantastic. I think that's a great insight. We have just 1 minute left. So in 30 seconds, if you can just tell us resilience, eyes wide open. What does it mean to you, and why it's important for young people?
So eyes wide open means that when you have a crisis, you don't hide under a rock. You confront the crisis. You look at it. You embrace it. You recognize that it's not of your own making, but that it's there, and you understand its contours as best as you can, rather than be paralyzed. Because without that, you can't respond. That's the eyes wide open. And resilience, to recognize that the world has lived through pandemics. By the way, there's a lovely paper from some Harvard scholars after the Ebola crisis that identified the 7 most disastrous pandemics of the last 500 years. And in the scheme of this one is pretty normal. I know it seems crazy now for us, but it's pretty normal. So we've been through this before. And if we follow the rules, we'll minimize heartache and not to make light of anybody's suffering, but as much as possible, we know how to minimize the casualties and distress, mental distress of this effort. So be resilient. When you recognize that, I think it gives you inner strength to be resilient and start to invest in your own futures by taking every opportunity to be involved in your local community, which I think is within your control. And I wish you all extremely well. And thank you so much for the privilege of speaking to all of you. Yeah. And Ijaj and team, you're very kind and very inspirational to pull this together. And my salute to all of you and my best wishes.
No, thank you so much. We are really honored to have you with us. I think as my parting comments, just to summarize what we have learned from you, I think it was very enriching. I'm sure all of us in the audience have greatly benefited from your comments. Be resilient. We just have to endure this. There's no point hiding behind a rock. You have to face the reality. It's going to be tough, but we have to be, have that inner resilience, be strong, face it, try to make a contribution to others. Now is a great time to volunteer for a local nonprofit or a social enterprise, make a difference in the lives of others. And these transferable skills that we are building will be useful for you in the future. And some of your concrete advice for young people as how they can engage in online learning. You can just sit at home and build a new skill, make a difference. I think that will be very useful for all our participants. This talk will be on Facebook, so people can come back and watch this. I would encourage the young participants to follow Professor Tarun Khanna on his LinkedIn page, and you can share your reflections on his comments. We have another session in half an hour where we will have young entrepreneurs and investors from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India, and Bangladesh talking particularly about business and how the entrepreneurial ecosystem in South Asia will be shaped. That will start in half an hour. So I would invite you to take a break and come back. And once again, to Professor Tarun Khanna, thank you so much. I am really grateful to you. I know how busy you are. You had a meeting in the morning and you have a lot of things going on. Despite all of that, you made time for the young people in South Asia. So on behalf of everyone, our deepest appreciation to you. Have a great day and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.